one of our largest areas of interest is weed management. And what I'll be talking about is implementing a weed prevention strategy to maintain your hard and artificial surfaces. And most of the stuff I'll be talking about is extremely simple, going back to probably GCSE biology for some people. But it's extremely effective nature-based solutions that we're talking about. First, I think it's quite important that we make a distinction between weed prevention and weed killing, and establish exactly what I mean when I talk about weed prevention. So most of us are probably familiar with an analogy I like to use, which is a headache you might get after drinking too much on the previous night. And we can often reach for the painkillers to alleviate the headache, which is one of the symptoms. And just the same as that, we could reach for the bottle of glyphosate to spray the weeds as they've occurred. But we could also have avoided the pain of the headache in the first place had we avoided drinking so much alcohol, or had we drunk some more water during the evening. Now, water is a good solution for killing weeds, and it's also a good solution for treating a headache to an extent, but its use as a remedial solution to both problems is not the same as its use as a preventative solution to those problems, and we have to treat them a bit differently. So taking water throughout the evening with your alcohol will have a much bigger effect than it will trying to treat the headache after it's occurred. Whereas taking the painkiller while you're having the alcohol during the evening won't have very much effect, but it will have a greater effect after the headache's occurred. And it's a similar thing with weed killer. So when we're looking at treating hard surfaces and preventing problems on hard surfaces, one of the first things we need to really understand is what the objective of the hard surface is. So there's lots of different types of surface, from gravel to concrete and tarmac, block paving, or an artificial sports pitch. And they're all doing slightly different jobs. And it's important to understand these differences to try and come up with an effective solution. So most of them will be supporting the weight of traffic using the surface, which can be compromised as the surface gets damaged. Most of them will be providing grip for surface users, which again can be compromised as detritus or a layer of soil or moss builds up on the surface. They need to remove surface water quickly to prevent flooding. They need to provide a safe and accessible environment for users. So, for example, a footpath, when it's nice and open, allows two people perhaps in pushchairs or wheelchairs to pass. And then as weeds encroach further and further onto the surface, it makes that job impossible. And then finally, a lot of surfaces are there to look good. And weeds are obviously a problem for that. So if weeds aren't the core problem, they're a symptom, what are the real problems? Well, detritus buildup is a massive one that I'm going to be talking about today. And that's the buildup of organic material on the surface, which degrades into soil. So this organic material might come from trees or grass, and lots of other animals might bring it onto the surface. And then to a lesser extent from what I'm going to be talking about today, but it's still important, surface compaction. So surface compaction can just be caused by pressure compressing the surface, but it can also be the binding of a surface with organic material. And we see this especially on artificial surfaces, and you get a hard crust over the top and it stops the surface from draining properly. And that allows the surface to stay damp, and you get moss and other weeds caused by that. And then surface displacement, which is the movement of the surface, which creates pockets for soil to sit in. And this is often caused by both heavy traffic and also freeze thaw. I often get the comment, well, why can't we tolerate weeds on hard surfaces to an extent? And I think freeze thaw is the biggest argument against it. If you leave soil damp on a surface and you get a morning like this morning where it's gone to -5, you end up with the surface, the soil and the water it's holding freezing, and then expanding out any cracks in the surface and breaking it up and making those cracks bigger. So more water can get in the next time and soil can get in the next time and push it out further. So they're the main problems we need to address. So an integrated weed management regime for a surface requires a tailored plan for that surface. We need to clarify the specific performance properties you're after. What does the surface need to do? Identify potential threats to those properties. So what's going to cause it to stop fulfilling those things, and then put in place preventative maintenance measures that will keep the surface performing at its best. So if you think about a typical highway, it's made up of quite a few different elements that all require their own maintenance. So a highway stretches all the way from one boundary fence or maybe a hedgerow or the front of a house all the way to the same on the other side. And in between, you'll have often a section of hedgerow, a verge, the main carriageway, a footpath, and then the same vegetation the other side. And all of these elements and the design of them impact the weed growth you're going to get on the hard surface. The biggest win you can achieve when dealing with weeds is removing the soil from the hard surface. So the depth of the soil is extremely important, because it's the depth of the soil that determines really what types of weed you're going to get there. If you have a perfectly clean tarmac surface, as Richard was saying earlier, the surfaces that are swept very often, like the city centres, you don't get weeds growing on those surfaces because there's no nutrients for them to use or support for them to use in the tarmac surface. But where soil builds up over the time from the buildup of detritus, you get deeper and deeper soil. And if that's left a couple of millimeters, you'll start getting moss. If it's left a little bit more than that, you'll start getting annual weeds that will send smaller roots out, and they'll start growing up. Deeper again, you end up getting perennials, which have much deeper root systems. And obviously, but they require the depth to support them. And I have seen on certain pavements woody shrubs and small trees growing out of the soil that enough's built up. And if you don't do enough sweeping, don't do enough removing the soil, that's what you'll end up with. So this soil then is being caused by detritus falling from trees, from the grass clippings that aren't collected, from the other plants and animals, even from dead weeds that we've sprayed and left on the surface. So the next biggest thing after removing the soil that's already there that you can do is preventing the soil from arriving in the first place, which can be done by minimizing the amount of detritus that's generated by these different sources. So removing detritus is actually accounted for in our law. So the Environmental Protection Act of 1990 imposes duties under Section 89 on certain landowners and occupiers to keep specified land clear of litter and refuse, and on local authorities and the Secretary of State to keep clean public highways for which they are responsible. The DEFRA Code of Practice on Litter and Refuse clarifies this as well and says that detritus on metalled highways must be removed as a requirement of this duty to keep highways clean. And you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, there's a detritus grading scale that they've put together to show what's acceptable and what's not. And there's a time scale for how quickly each grade should be removed. It's expected that managers of land should, through monitoring, as we've discussed, an appropriate use of resources, keep land clear of litter and refuse so it doesn't fall below the grade B that was on the slide previously, and is cleansed to an A on a regular basis. Metalled highways must be free of detritus after cleansing to a grade A. Where vegetated and metalled surfaces abut, so along a rural road, for example, with a verge straight on the road, managers should make a judgment as to the definitive edge of the metalled surface, and the extent of the detritus should then be removed so it's back to the edge. And detritus can be managed with an effective sweeping regime. So on top of sweeping and getting rid of this, it's also important to think about having the right plant in the right place to begin with. So there's certain verges, for example, that might not need to be grass. Grass has been a well-adopted plant for verges, but it needs mowing maybe 8 or 12 times a year. And if you're dropping and leaving all that grass and it gets blown onto the surface, that's an awful lot of detritus buildup. The same with trees. You can choose certain different types of trees for different areas, so that you're picking trees that aren't dropping so many leaves and cutting back canopies and things like that. So there's lots of different ground cover plants we could choose instead, and they may or may not be appropriate depending on where your verge is, how much foot traffic it's getting, etc. We can also design out the problem, so we can avoid areas in our design where soil might get trapped, that it's not so easy to sweep. So a sharp corner, your road sweeper finds very difficult to get into. So this picture is an example in York of where a sweeper obviously misses the corner to go around and continue, and misses on the other side, and then you get a massive buildup of soil and all the weeds. So if we design a sweeping bend to begin with, then it avoids this. And using barriers as well to prevent organic material from falling on the hard surface in the first place. The other thing that's crucially important to both the effectiveness of alternative methods, so a few of the alternative methods to using glyphosate are heat-based treatments, so thermal treatments. And the real key to using them effectively, cheaply, and efficiently is to catch the weed as early as possible. So the earlier we treat the plant in the cycle, the smaller it is, so the quicker you're able to pass over it with the heat, so it uses a lot less energy. The plant also has a lot less energy in itself as well to be able to regrow. So it will take far fewer applications if you can hit it early on in the cycle. And then we can also deplete the seed bank. So lots of people I talk to are treating weeds for the first time in the year during late May, early June, by which point the plant is so big it's going to seed or soon, and you spray the glyphosate, and then it in a panic, I suppose, as much as plants panic, it will put all its energy into producing seeds to carry on, and then you've increased the seed bank. What we do if we treat it earlier, well before it starts going to seed, is that we stop it doing that, and you get far less seeds in the soil to begin with. So your annual preventative tasks then. In winter, this is the best time of year to be removing the soil and cutting back trees and removing foliage, etc., so that the opportunities for new weed growth in the coming season are absolutely minimized. You'll have clean pavements, etc., to begin with. Then in spring, early spring, so March really, but then onwards is the best time to administer thermal treatments to weeds. So there's several different options that all work very well depending on the surface. Again, hot water, and there's some hot water products on the market that don't require a diesel generator to be going while they're heated. So they're a bit more efficient inherently. There's also hot air, so that there's a few different hot air systems. There's foam. All these systems work by using thermal energy to wilt the plant. But they work much more effectively on smaller, younger plants. Then summer is the best time to ensure that any grass and leaf clippings are collected as you're going along. So every time you're cutting the grass, if you can put in a cut and collect system rather than cut and drop, you will really improve your situation. And then keeping on top of leaf fall and reducing detritus in autumn, it's a big task, but it really needs to be done to keep on top of that. And sealing any cracks in any hard surfaces. So in all your tarmac, you want any of the gaps up the edge of the curb, any of the cracks that have appeared to be sealed before the winter, so that water can't get into them, freeze and make them bigger and make your job harder next time around. So now I guess it's up to you. My suggestion would be that each of you going forward doing an integrated weed management regime, conduct a survey of all your assets, have a look at all your roads, see what the current state of the surface is, what the weed problem is, what the soil buildup is, what the sources of detritus are, and see where you can minimize those sources of detritus, work to reduce it. Then remove all the existing soil buildup and then keep those surfaces free of detritus. So to do those things, it's mainly going to be weed brushes and sweeping, and perhaps a certain amount of doing it by hand, depending on budget. And then treating any weeds that do come through early to reduce the seed bank. If you want any more information on surface maintenance or weed prevention and integrated weed management, we've got quite a lot on the website. Please take a look at the links that are on the screen now. Otherwise, thank you very much.